Hello and welcome to the current episode of Unboxing Russia. My name is Pradnya, and together with Ekaterina Schulmann, we are going to look at some of the perceptions and expectations that are connected with the American elections, with the results of the American elections, and what they mean to our respective countries. But before that, we were just talking about a comment that we made in the last episode where Ekaterina was sharing some of her insights from her trip to the US.
A journey. I would elevate it to the title of a journey, even a pilgrimage.
Yeah, and you came across a poster which said, "Our boys will not be taught to hate the US."
Yes.
And we have figured out what that is. Also,
and since
thanks
I was just driving by,
yeah.
I couldn't properly see the details. I could just see that it showed the back of somebody's head. But what it signified was beyond me. But my colleague Pradnya very kindly took to Googling it. And now we know whether it is connected to elections or not. Because why I paid attention to it in the first place was for the reason that we were traveling across America during the last weeks of presidential election campaign. And to my Russian ideas, it was clear that the whole country should be filled with advertising, billboards, faces of the candidates, and all sorts of electorally related stuff. But I couldn't see anything. Well, there were those things stuck in the ground, which is this weird American tradition. Why do they put their electoral placards so low? You should put them up. And I noticed this, "Our boys will not be educated to hate America" thing, because it was something evidently political, and I thought it was some kind of electoral advertisement. So what is it really?
So it's actually a poster that was put up by a Jewish organization in the US, which kind of is a point that they're trying to make, that the children who will visit traditional Jewish schools,
the yeshivas,
will not be taught to hate the United States. And in my reading, and this is a pure uneducated guess, as opposed to some of the educated guesses that we try to make, I think it's also a snub at the whole conversation happening in the American society on the issue of Gaza, and how there is a lot of pushback from a lot of academic circles to the American policy towards Israel and the whole region and the whole conflict that has been going on for the past several months, unnecessarily far too long.
And now the electoral results, which we already know by the time of recording this conversation, are constructed by some as showing the counter-reaction of American public towards too much wokeness, towards too much liberalism in the way liberalism is understood in the United States, where it means a completely different thing
from what it means in Russia. What do you think it means in Russia?
Well, and here we're coming to the very heart of our conversation, because we want to talk about the way American elections and American politicians, including the president-elect, are perceived in Russia and in India. Because in Russia, American elections enjoy an enormous amount of attention. It's quite a fixation for the Russian public, for two reasons. First, because they are generally important, and because America is, again, understood to be the driving force of the modern world. Some see it in a positive light, some, including current Russian leadership, in a negative light, but that is a thing that is understood. There's a lot of talk about the decline of American order, the end of Pax Americana, the emergence of some new world order. No one quite explains what it will be like, but when it comes to electing the president of America, it is an understood thing that the consequences will be not just about United States, but about the whole world and also about Russia. So this is reason number one why Russians are so obsessed
about the American elections.
That's the right word, obsessed about American elections. And the second reason is that Russians are a highly educated nation that is denied political participation. So if you don't have your own political life, if you don't have your own electoral competition or anything resembling competitive elections, then of course you will follow elections in other countries where there's some sort of intrigue, where there is something to
You
watch.
live your fantasies through the other.
Yes, perhaps. And there's an absolutely genius political cartoon about that, which I tried to describe to one of the audiences in an American university that I was speaking at. It is by artist Sergei Yolkin, who is a foreign agent like myself. And he actually, at my request, he drew this picture that is on the cover of my book, the yellow book, the collection of my articles. So he had this picture, I think, back in 2016, and it shows a typical and rather bleak Russian countryside landscape with little village huts and the road, and two people meeting in the middle of the road, the man dressed as a shepherd, and the woman with buckets of water. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at each other, and he says, Michigan and Pennsylvania have not been counted yet. Mm. And this is like every one of us. We are this man and this woman, because when electoral time comes, all we care about is whether Michigan and Pennsylvania have been counted yet. Mm. So this is one side of the story. The current situation adds a couple of dimensions to this.
But going back to the starting point,
yes.
How do you define Russian wokeism? And how is it different from the non-Russian, the Western liberal wokeism? Because India has a very different understanding of that, so we can go there later.
So in America, liberalism is understood in a much more left-wing way than in Russia.
A radical? Maybe?
It's not about radicalism. I'll try to explain. Generally, your average Russian intellectual, just your average Russian educated person, will be much more right-wing than his peer in Europe or United States. This is because Russians have been subjected to a totalitarian communist regime. So anything that speaks about collective values, equality, state ordering people what to think, what to read, and what not to read, triggers a traumatic reaction in almost every one of us. This has converted, during the years of late 80s and 90s, the years of freedom, into a not completely healthy sort of liberalism in a sense of individualism. Everyone for himself. Live and let live. The state should not interfere. A kind of thinking that would, I think, be called libertarian rather than liberal in the United States. Sometimes this is weirdly coupled with a very free understanding of morality, in a sense that you should not tell me what to do with my, I don't know, sex life. Even in a sense that you should not tell me what to do for the sake of protecting women's rights or minorities.
Is it a very individual-based understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This very easily leads to the homo homini lupus est approach, which is not good for any social body, for any community. But generally, because of the trauma of communism, or rather the trauma of totalitarianism, Russians tend to swing to the right. This is not a new thing. I have connected it with the late Soviet, early post-Soviet situation. But back in the Soviet times, when those very few people from America or from Europe who were able to get into the country and talk to the Soviet dissidents, the anti-Soviet intellectual elite, were surprised and sometimes shocked by the fact that they saw completely eye to eye with them on every question, on the questions of censorship, freedom of speech, hatred of repressions, etc. The necessity to bring down the Soviet regime, to end the Communist Party monopoly on ideology. But when the conversation came to, say, the war in Vietnam, there was a complete divergence. For the Soviet dissidents, that was the war of the communists against the anti-communists. So they supported fully United States in this conflict. And civic casualties meant nothing to them, really. Because they've seen too much casualties around them. And because in their understanding, if the communists were to win, the headcount will rise to millions, like it did in China, like it did in Russia. And American and European intellectuals couldn't understand that. For them, it sounded like the sudden transformation of their lovely, long-suffering liberal friend into a bloodthirsty Republican falcon or hawk. And this division has not only has it not disappeared, I think it remains more or less the same if it has not gone wider. This is why there is this general impression that every Russian is a Trump fan. Many people from the diaspora in the States, Russian diaspora, do support Trump. Partially because they are of Jewish extraction, and the Republican Party's position is much more pro-Israel. Partially because of this ideological division that I'm describing. So it's a more complicated situation than Putin loves Trump because they're both autocrats. One is a full-blown autocrat, another is an autocrat wannabe.
In making.
Yeah, well, wannabe, struggling with his nation's system of constitutional checks and balances. But as I said, it's more complicated than that. Because people who are anti-Putin and anti-regime will very often also support Trump. Because for them, the whole concept of wokeness and the American version of liberalism is indeed communist-style censorship. Come again. This is, again, I'm not saying that this is rational or right. We're not here to...
But then how do you differentiate between... So let me put it this way. In India, for instance, when you talk about being woke is almost used as if it's an insult. So if someone tells you stop being so woke about things, it's actually like a slap in your face.
And what does it mean? What should you stop doing?
It necessarily means that you are very pro-Western, you know, and with Western they necessarily mean it's this very liberal kind of an elitist worldview, which has less to do with realities on the ground of people who are not so privileged.
So stop being so idealistic, or stop being so westernized as to
put it very
judge your own
bluntly,
country.
it's that it's something like if you had the privilege of living and studying in a place like the United States, you reek of privilege. You are disconnected from the realities of common people.
So wokeness is understood as a sort of luxury belief.
It's a luxury belief. It's also disconnected with realities in the hinterlands, especially. So it's actually used as an insult. And the how would I say it? So there is this counter, not movement, but there's this phenomena that is coming up. So you have
a counter reaction.
You have an intelligentsia, which is now right wing in their thought process. So, you know, they have kind of come up in a response to this very popular perception that right wing almost always lacks people who are eloquent, people who are in a position to substantiate their thoughts in very solid statistics, in solid proof, in saying that, you know, this is not just a very brazen approach. You have all the data that points towards these tendencies. So now it's this intelligentsia versus the woke bubble. And the woke bubble is then almost a degradation, because, because just by being woke, you're not necessarily smart enough. You just using that credential of being Harvard educated.
So Indian intelligentsia is also rather leaning to the right side?
The new emerging intelligentsia is. So there is also this conflict within the Indian intelligentsia, also in the West. So there are people who would, then kind of discredit professors, intellectuals who are teaching at established universities in the West and who have been criticizing the Modi government by saying that, they are so privileged, that they are so disconnected with what's happening within India. And this new generation of intellectuals who are coming up, they actually are more connected with those realities. And that's why they think that what's happening with India under Mr. Modi is actually a step forward. So there is this inherent conflict within that bubble.
If you are more of a conservative kind of type, you are more likely to support the present government, right? Or not?
Yeah. But you also have the right credentials. So you actually may have 1 PhD, 3 postdocs. You might have been serving on this advisory board and that advisory board.
So it's not like you are an Indian equivalent to a redneck. I don't know how you would call. No, this kind of people. There is this progress term in Russian. They're called vatniki. Vatnik is a peasant's warm coat. So it's quite usual to try to insult people by citing the things that they wear or are likely to wear.
No, these are extremely smart people. These are people who are who walk the talk, who know what terms to use, but they use it to be in your face.
So if we come back to the American drama, is Trump himself a popular figure in the Indian public discourse and mass imagination?
He is, but currently more so because he has a very good camaraderie with Mr. Modi. In 2019, they did an event in Houston, which was called Howdy Modi, which was hosted in the honor of Mr. Modi visiting the United States. And it was a stadium full of Indian Americans and some Americans who supported Mr. Trump. And it was a brilliant gig that was conducted to engage with this extremely powerful, extremely wealthy diaspora of Indian Americans who are not a small force to reckon with in the United States. They are a population of about 5 million people.
How do they vote? Do we know?
So that's the interesting thing. I think traditionally they have been more democratic, voting towards the Democrats, because large amount of that drive also comes from the fact that the Democrats have been more open to the H-1B visas, which is very key for Indian IT people to work in the United States. Having said that, in the past, in the current election, there have been shifts. There have been small but steady shifts where people have started to vote Republican, because I think this is a broader phenomena. The Democrats in the history were people who were more connected to the hinterlands, who were connected to the common people.
Yes.
And the Republicans were,
the elite party.
The elite party.
The rich
now the rhetoric
party
has changed under Mr. Trump. So the Republicans are more in touch with what the common man needs. And the Democrats, for lack of better word, and to stick to the plot, are the woke people, So having said that, so there are these shifts, but in the current election, there are 6 Indian Americans who made it to the Congress.
Oh.
And all of them are Democrats. And one person who was very very much on the top of the Republican agenda was Vivek Ramaswamy, who had expressed his desire to be a presidential candidate. He did not make it, but nonetheless, he did ruffle some feathers, and he's a young Indian man, fairly young compared to the other.
I think I know who you're talking about. I've heard the name. I even seen the face.
Because he was suddenly he was, this counter narrative to Kamala Harris, because she is also Indian woman, and there's this younger Indian man with a family, and the very conservative traditional family values and all of that.
And he has a name that is very difficult to pronounce for an English language speaker.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy. So
that's why one can train oneself. I think it's a surmountable obstacle.
Yeah, so going back to if Trump is popular,
he is. As a man in the myth, a cultural figure.
So within India, he is quite popular because Mr. Modi has a good relationship with him. India also hosted an event with him just a few months after this Howdy Modi event in Houston. They did...
that's a catchy name.
Yeah, they did a Namaste Trump in India. So, tit for tat kind of a situation. And they also kind of went out of their way to express their support for the nominated candidates. So Mr. Modi expressed his support for the candidate, and when Mr. Modi was running for office, Mr. Trump was very much, they have a bromance going on, and these are both men who are extremely uncomfortable in terms of how they deal with women.
They're not uncomfortable. They're extremely comfortable. Other people are uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's the women who are uncomfortable, and that's why I spoke from the woman's perspective.
The onlookers.
Yeah, so Mr. Modi was one of the first leaders who actually came out and said, congratulations to the president-elect. And they're looking forward to a great cooperation in the coming 4 years. So that kind of captures the narrative within the government circles. But I think when you take the jingoism aside and the whole narrative rhetoric of it aside, a lot of professional diplomats are actually looking at it as a mixed bag, because it can be a lot of challenges because Trump is extremely unpredictable, but it also brings a lot of opportunities with itself. So I think they are just going to wait to see how that pans out.
Within Russia, the image of Trump enjoyed the whole long history of development. I think you can write a scholarly work about it, the evolution of the Trump figure in Russian popular imagination and political discourse. When he first was elected, he was supposed to be the best friend Russia can ever have. Russian political establishment back in 2016 could not believe that competitive elections are real and that the ruling party will allow anyone to displace it. So they fully believed that, as we say in Russia, Washingtonский обком, Washington Central Party Committee, has decided that Hillary Clinton is to be the next president. And no matter what you do, no matter how people vote, the president she will be. So when he did win the elections, it was an euphoric kind of surprise.
The first time around.
Yes, in 2016. I remember Margarita Simonyan, who is head of the state-owned propaganda media Russia Today, wrote that she's going to drive through Moscow with American flags sticking out of her window in honor of this victory of American people over the establishment, which is not a completely novel idea, nor the one that originated in her own fertile brain, but it is ironic, in a sense, how people who are the very cogs and bits of a mechanism of falsifying every election for the last 20 plus years are eager and enthusiastic when they perceive that real elections exist somewhere. So
it's also bizarre, that a person who is so much a face of an establishment is taking a lot of joy in saying, oh, here's a person who's anti-establishment and who's making it to the top office.
Because she's the good establishment and that's the bad democratic establishment in America. So during the first Trump term, there were a lot of hopes and expectations of a better relations with Russia, in a sense that he's an autocrat, our guy is an autocrat, they will make a deal. They will not talk about nonsense like principles or rules or laws. They will just strike a deal.
They're there for the business.
Yes, of course. And Russian president is hampered by no rules, whatever. And his American colleague looked to him and to the Russian establishment in general as the same kind of figure. The drama, I would almost say, a tragedy of Russian official perceptions of American politics is that they don't understand how it works. I can't say that I understand much of it either. It's certainly not my field of expertise. But even I can get the idea that American president does not run the country single-handed.
He wants to, but he doesn't.
Okay, we suppose that he wants to. We suppose that he, as I said, is an autocrat wannabe, but he tried it once. if he did, and the establishment kind of survived him. With all this talk of draining the swamp and defeating the deep state, I've never been quite able to understand what the deep state is. If it's regular bureaucracy, then you can't have a country without that. So how deep is the deep state? If it's alternatively some parallel system of real government that is disconnected to the public state service, then it must be a bad thing, but you don't need any special measures to put an end to it because it should be a simple criminal case. So, coming back to Russia and its hopes. Russians, including Russians in the Kremlin, don't understand Congress because they don't understand parliaments. They don't understand either party competition or party cooperation. And they can't wrap their heads around the division of responsibilities and powers between the Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the presidential administration. They are additionally baffled by the fact that there is no government in the United States in a sense of no prime minister. So they think that American president is both Russian president and Russian prime minister, therefore a doubly powerful figure, additionally because America is more powerful than Russia. So he can do whatever he wants. Because of this misunderstandings, those 4 Trump years were a series of disappointments. There were meetings that resulted in nothing. New sanctions were enforced against Russia. America attacked Syria and killed, by different estimations, from 80 to 200 Wagner mercenaries in Syria. And Russia swallowed this, saying they are not Russian soldiers, they serve a private military company. So not only there were no perceptible advantages of the Trump rule to Russia, meaning to the Kremlin, but there were considerable difficulties and losses during that period. So when came 2020 elections, and of course seen through the optics of the Russian establishment, who are themselves used to electoral falsifications and who don't understand what is popular vote and how does it translate into the electoral college. For them, it was the same story of the incumbent who doesn't want to step down.
But here's one question, because in those elections, there was proof in the aftermath that there was a lot of meddling by the Russian state, especially in the sphere of online spaces
cyber attacks and trolling, and
place.
invading social media.
What were they hoping for?
Comments.
Because if they were so skeptical about the return of Mr. Trump, or basically putting in Mr. Trump in the office in the first place, why were they so keen on putting him in rather than Hillary Clinton?
That's an excellent question, because that allows us to understand what they were actually keen on. Russians were not and are not supportive of any candidate in particular. They are supporting chaos. So the point of this meddling was not to specifically help Trump get elected, but to create an atmosphere of distrust and general distraction and dysfunctionality in the American political system, in the American political space, so that America will have its hands so full at home that it will not be able to interfere with Russia doing whatever it wants in what it considers to be its own sphere of influence. And this brings us back nicely to the present day. So I was mentioning 2020, which was almost a realization of the Kremlin desires for American chaos. So, again, to them, it was a clear case of the deep state falsifying electoral results because they want this outsider out and they want to get back into the White House, which they did. Of course, the main proponent of the idea that his victory has been stolen from him was the incumbent himself. And actually, he was trying to do a very autocratic thing. He was trying to stay in power, no matter what the electoral outcome. Since 2020, no tangible proof has ever been shown to anyone, to say nothing of being brought to a court hearing, of any falsifications
or electoral manipulation.
Or electoral manipulations on the scale large enough to influence electoral outcomes anywhere, not just globally, but even locally. Nonetheless, this is the very situation that the Russians would want to see. Americans distrusting the system. Americans thinking that electoral results are not to be believed in to such an extent that they are not even asking to have a recount of votes like in 2000, or like it happens quite often in post-Soviet countries, in Ukraine or right now in Georgia, when some parties are not satisfied with the electoral outcome, they go out and protest and they say, we don't recognize electoral results, let's either count the votes again or let's have another round, like it happened in Ukraine. But this American reaction was, in a sense, even worse, because it was not directed with any sort of demand towards their own electoral system. But the idea was, I will stay in the White House no matter what.
But now here is a plot in the twist in the plot. Because now this time, the one side of the spectrum who could have created more chaos was the supporters of Mr. Trump. And now he has very clearly won. So that actually helps them reinstate their faith in the system.
Right.
And that is not a nice thing for Russians.
Not at all. That's what I was coming to. The euphoria of 2016 has not been in any degree repeated in 2024. I'm reading a lot of loyalists, including former friends and colleagues from the parliament. And their formula is this: we cannot be happy about Trump being reelected under the slogans of American exceptionalism. And he is a tough guy and he's unpredictable and he's not been much use to us last time. But those bad Democratic guys lost, and that is enjoyable. So let's just do a bit of Schadenfreude if we can't really be optimistic about the electoral outcome as it is. We can at least enjoy the discomfiture of our Democratic opponents. And from the point of view of encouraging chaos, 2024 situation is much healthier for America than either 2016 or 2020. Especially as compared to 2020. In 2016, there was too much talk about foreign interference, which was not then fully corroborated by any fact that we were able to see. There was interference. We now know the people who orchestrated it. Some of them are dead already, as happens in Russian politics.
They just fall out of the window.
Yes, some fall out of the window, some explode dramatically on their jet planes. So things happen.
Black humor, all the way. Dark humor.
Where was the humor?
No, like just exploding or falling out of the window.
Well, yes, it's a reality, you know, nothing to joke about here. So, but these interferences were not influential to any significant degree. And in 2020, the situation was even worse because the very foundations of American constitutional system were put under question. The system survived. The institutions survived both the Trump presidency, which was rather chaotic in the administrative sense, and they survived what we could qualify as a coup attempt in 2020. It was in 2021, actually, the very beginning of January.
The first week of January.
Yes. And the system also survived the riots of Black Lives Matter. And
it survived an entire pandemic.
And the pandemic. And the consequences of the pandemic and the fiscal policies of the then acting administration, the inflation that resulted from helicopter money policy. So this time, no one is talking about foreign interference. There were some initial talk about electoral manipulations, but when it appeared that Trump is actually winning, of course, the Republican Party stopped talking about that. So we will see, I hope, that miracle of miracles, the peaceful transfer of power. not because of violence, not because of the physical facts of life, like somebody dying, but because of a procedure. When you come to think of it, it is a miracle.
It is. You may not like it, but it's still a miracle.
I like it.
No, I'm saying that
I like it extremely.
If you know who the person taking over the power is, it may give you some tummy ache and some headache and all kinds of aches.
I understand he's not a charming person. I, for myself, don't enjoy looking at him at all. But I don't enjoy looking at... I even less enjoy looking at our own president. So there's perhaps something to choose between the two. But if that happens, if the transfer of power is indeed peaceful, then with all the fears of the president-elect trying to overthrow establishment, I think the maximum he can do is to, I don't know, cut down the State Department and generally create chaos in the White House. The nation will survive that, I strongly suspect.
Yeah, but now here's the thing, because connecting to what you just said, that he may do some budget cuts in the State Department, in the foreign policy arena.
And fire 10,000 bureaucrats, as he promised.
Yeah.
Again, with all due respect to them, I know some of them. They're highly competent people. America will survive even that.
But there is a small win there when it comes to Russia on that front, because one of the first things that Mr. Trump had promised to do, at least when he was on the electoral campaign, was to end the war between Russia and Ukraine within 24 hours. And here's what is important for India in that context, because India has this very diversified relationship, partly with the United States, but also with Russia. India is hoping that with Mr. Trump in office, India will have it easy, that India will not be constantly pressurized by Washington to stop dealing with Russia. Because if Mr. Trump either just pulls out of the war and says that, hey, not my problem, sorry, you guys handle it yourself, then India doesn't really have much of a problem, because then the United States has no skin in the game. So they're not going to start pressurizing the Indians. Or if Mr. Trump manages to find or manages to kind of strong arm the parties to reach any kind of a negotiation.
To force them into negotiations.
Yeah, so I think...
Which I think is the plan as far as it has been leaked.
That's a situation that India can live with. There are also talks in New Delhi that Mr. Trump might also ask India to kind of, take up some sort of mediation, because the United States and Russia are not the best of friends. But Mr. Modi has a great bromance going on with both sides of the pond. So maybe he can play, and that's a role that he seems to kind of, he will just bloom in that role of, being the person who brings
flourish
peace to the world. But anyway, so I think India has a lot riding on that one particular thing, that India will have a little easy way out of the whole conversation.
This may be one of...
Just to add one, so Mr. Trump is also not someone who's going to go pointing his fingers in your face about democracy, about human rights violations.
No, definitely not.
So I think that works well.
Kind of thing.
That works well for a lot of parties in New Delhi.
Well, this is one of the reasons why Trump enjoys such a popularity in many circles of Russian society that do not agree well with each other. One part which is more loyalist expects him to do what you said he is likely to do, to withdraw American influence and American support from this Ukrainian drama completely, and leave Europe to deal with it as Europe best can. And then the war will be over because Ukraine will be swallowed up by Russia. On the other hand, people who are anti-Putin expect that Trump may offer Russia a deal, and if Russia disagrees with it, then he will use force. And this may also bring the war to an end by, for example, creating the ceasefire and this frozen line between the two armies, and give Ukraine time to recuperate, rearm, and try to somehow fill up its huge demographic
But
gaps.
the Kremlin has said, right, that they are open to negotiate. They're open to talks.
They're always saying this, like 3
but
times
there's
a
no
week.
substance to it.
No, I can't see anything as yet.
Okay.
Currently, I think the Kremlin considers that war is going well for the country, that they can sustain it for at least another year.
Okay.
So why stop? And that will put some pressure on the new American president, in fulfilling his electoral obligations.
Leaving us, let's not even get into the whole German drama of what's happening here, because that will also be a very key topic.
That's by far too complicated for me to talk about.
No, but it will also be a key topic about how Germany responds to it, because for those who are interested, the current German government is also in a big conundrum.
You know more about this than I do. Why will the German chancellor fire his minister of defense because Americans have elected a president? Is there a connection?
There's no direct connection, but one of the key points of differences was wanting to invest more in kind of upping the defense budget of Germany, and also contributing more towards the war effort in Ukraine.
Again, I'm sorry, that's not defense minister or finance minister.
No, but yeah, but he had a lot of say in how much money, and it had a lot to do with constitutional reforms and all of that, because there's something called as a budget break, or how much debt you can take is regulated. So there were disagreements on if to do away with that regulation or not. But having said that, I think German politics is a different game. I'm just saying that it is going to be a decisive thing for the new government that may be elected in the coming months. So
coming back to the anti-Putin part of Russia supporting Trump. So you see, if there's this deal, it will not be satisfactory to either party. I think everyone understands that by that point. But if there is a sort of ceasefire with American and European guarantees, then it will give some breathing time to Ukraine, and it will give Russia time to, frankly, wait till Putin dies. So a pause.
But is that an acceptable option?
To whom?
To Putin or to Kremlin?
That's exactly the point. Again, I've been reading, much as I desire to stay away from discussions in which I cannot play a competent part, I still have been reading these peace plans leaking from the Republican establishment, especially the one published in a Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago. And it's a very good plan if they can enforce it. It's an excellent one.
And do they have any leverage over Mr. Putin to strong-arm him?
That's the whole issue. So why should Russia even start discussing these terms?
No, but this is a question to you. Do you think they have some leverage over Mr. Putin?
There's so much bragging going around that one hardly knows what to believe. And that is, again, that's foreign policy. If indeed Trump does what he said he'd do, offer the terms, take them or leave them, and if you leave them, then I arm Ukraine to the teeth. There may be something in that. Also, much depends on the timing. I said that official Russia, considers that it can carry on the war for another year.
And they're better off in the winters, no? Like they're more well-equipped, better equipped to see the war effort through.
I don't really think so. Both parties have huge difficulties going to war in winter months. So there will be some sort of pause, except for bombings, sadly. That can go on. But this moving on the Donbas territory, that is right now, and it is going to get slower as weather gets colder. War is exhausting to Russia. The current Russian budget, the one that is now being processed by the parliament, is extraordinary.
In what sense?
In a sense of having a 25% higher military spending than even the previous year, 2024, which was also extraordinarily militarized in comparison with 2023. So we do have, I think, resources enough to carry on for another year. The chief problem being not even money, but people, the manforce.
And here's just thinking out loud. So do you think the promise of lifting sanctions on Russia could be something that could change the game?
Yes, absolutely. Sanctions are a complicated subject in themselves, but being allowed to sell gas back to Europe will be a huge
if the United
price
States
for the Kremlin.
puts that on the table as a deal, as a part of the deal.
But do they really want cheap gas back in Europe rather than their own liquefied gas?
And America wants to sell its own gas.
Right.
So
And
it's not all that easy at all.
American military-industrial complex needs,
The war.
it needs budget money.
It needs markets, to put it
markets.
very bluntly.
Yes, money and markets. That's right. So it's complicated. I'm so happy that this is not my province at all, that I don't go into presenting myself as a foreign policy expert, but rather I'm just dealing with what is happening inside the country. And to conclude our dissertation on the Trump image, I must add that as a figure, I wouldn't say as a person, because with that degree of publicity, we are dealing with perceptions and images rather than physical bodies. But as the image, he strikes a very familiar note for the Russian eye and ear. We have seen types like that. He looks like
An angry orange.
Well, he looks like a person you wouldn't want to buy a used car from, or somebody who is doing development and constructions in the Urals region with this, again, public presence, this style, the kind of wives he's marrying, the kind of apartments he is living in. This is so familiar. We've seen such people by dozens. Yes, oligarchs, regional entrepreneurs, this kind of people. So he's familiar, and in a sense, he is, strange as it may seem to you, he's likable.
He's more relatable. Like a lot of common people can relate to him.
Exactly, he's relatable. We don't exactly have people we never had anyone like President Obama. We have people like Hillary Clinton, and we dislike them because this is the deputy school headmistress, and we don't
very prim and proper.
Yes, we don't enjoy the type. Although I myself am said to embody something of this, and I'm supposed to be popular. Again, I'm not running for any office, but we don't have anyone like Kamala Harris, of course. Biden was something that we could relate to, because he's evidently an old bureaucrat, a nomenclatura figure who's been shaking hands with Gromyko back in the 60s and 70s. But the other people of the American politicum are unfamiliar to us. Trump is intensely familiar. And therefore, this relatability creates a sort of mutual liking, but it is not accidental, perhaps, that he is routinely marrying Eastern European wives.
No, but I think picking up on the point of Kamala Harris before we come to a close today, I had personally hoped that Indians would be more personally invested in the American elections, because this was a person who is of Indian descent. Her mother is Indian, or was Indian. And going by Indians' responses to any Indian anywhere in the world who is a part of, a big record-setting event like going to the space or something, India kind of just celebrates these kind of things. There are rallies, people go on distributing sweets on the streets, and there were small events held around the town where her mother came from. But barring that, India as a country did not see Kamala Harris as their candidate, for a variety of reasons.
Is it because the idea of a female president is still too exotic?
I think that would not be the case for India, because India had very strong female politicians leading the office.
Of course.
President's office, Prime Minister's office. Indira Gandhi was the one Indian Prime Minister, but someone who was a force to reckon with, for good or for worse. And then there were the President of India currently is also a woman. So I don't think it's so much to do about a woman being in office. I think it was this disconnect, because Mr. Modi also styles himself as the people's person who's
So it's not a
anti-establishment.
gender divide, but the class divide.
It's the class divide.
Now we are back
certainly.
to our Marxism.
Yeah, it's the class divide, certainly. But I felt it was a little sad that we did not see, or we did not root for Kamala Harris just as much. We chose not to root for Mr. Trump.
I'm wondering if we will see a female president of the United States in our lifetime.
Never say never.
Of course.
On that very positive note, thank you for joining us. And see you soon.
Thank you for listening. Like and comment and do whatever good YouTube citizens should do. And see you again soon.
Thank you.